Insights for Parsha Jethro. Chapter 18. 1. Jethro, priest of Midian. The word Midian literally means contention or strife. By calling Jethro the priest of Midian, even though he had long since renounced idolatry and relinquished the Midianite priesthood, it alludes to the fact that he had once practiced all forms of idolatry. 1. Whereas the Torah helps a person to unite with God, idolatry enhances his sense of ego, even if in very subtle, almost unconscious ways, and thus estranges him from God. By being the idolater par excellence, Jethro was thus the priest of strife too. About all God had done, that God had brought Israel out of Egypt. Alternatively, all that God had done refers to the exile in Egypt, which was an act of divine severity designed to purify the people and prepare them for receiving the Torah. Inasmuch as this was an act of divine severity, the name Elohim is used in this phrase. In contrast, that God had brought Israel out of Egypt refers to the Exodus itself, an act of divine mercy. As such, the name Havaya is used in this phrase. 3. 7. Moses prostrated himself and kissed Jethro. Moses embodied divine wisdom, whereas Jethro embodied natural, worldly wisdom. By bowing down to Jethro, Moses elevated natural wisdom and accepted it into the sphere of divine wisdom. This, as we have seen, was a prerequisite to the giving of the Torah. 5. They asked about each other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Moses and Jethro exchanged greetings before Moses recounted the details of God's miracles to Jethro. We normally exchange greetings before launching into even holy conversation, because encouraging peace between people takes precedence over recounting God's praise. 6. But here, something more significant was happening. As mentioned above, Jethro was formerly the priest of Midian, which means the purveyor of dissension. Jethro, the arch-idolater, had represented the factiousness and sectarianism that arises from allegiance to many gods and that destroys peaceful life. By first inquiring about each other's welfare, Jethro and Moses repudiated this cynical view of humanity. This further paved the way for the giving of the Torah, for its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. 7. 11. Now I know that God is greater than all the deities. As mentioned previously, 8. Jethro had researched the workings of creation from top to bottom and possessed expert knowledge of all the spiritual and scientific lore of his age. By declaring that all this knowledge led ultimately to the acceptance of the God's wisdom, Jethro paved the way for the giving of the Torah. Besides doing away with the delusion that creation is a jumble of disparate and opposing forces vying for our loyalty on the one hand and attempting to control us on the other, Jethro's declaration enabled the giving of the Torah in a much more profound way. The purpose of the revelation at Mount Sinai was not simply to inform the world of God's will. To a great extent, this had already happened. Ever since the creation, there was always a circle of individuals who studied the Torah. Rather, the revelation at Mount Sinai was meant to make God's essence accessible to the world via the Torah. God's essence transcends both the infinite and the finite, meaning that it can be infinite and finite at the same time. Jethro showed that following secular knowledge to its end results ultimately in obscurantism, distortion, disinformation, in idolatry. By declaring that all the world's wisdom, even what we normally consider finite and secular, is darkness unless it is seen as part of God's wisdom, Jethro revealed the essential transcendence of the Torah. He showed how the Torah, as a window to God's essence, encompasses all reality and is the means through which all reality can be absorbed into godliness and be made to express godliness. And this is how God Himself can be brought into all aspects of life, making the world into His true home. 9. The Hebrew word for the deities, or the gods, is the same as the name Elohim. Allegorically, then, this means that Jethro now knew that the name Havaya is greater than the name Elohim. Jethro understood that the exile was a manifestation of the power of the name Elohim, God's attribute of judgment and severity. When he heard that God took the Jews out of Egypt, he understood that God's mercy, signified by the name Havaya, can override his attribute of judgment. 10. In addition, as noted above 11, the purpose of the plagues was to demonstrate that God transcends nature, in other words, that the name Havaya can be manifest in the world, which the Egyptians thought was only under the influence of the name Elohim, the powers of nature. Thus, after he heard about the details of the Exodus, Jethro could understand how the name Havaya can override the name Elohim. 12. This was when he changed his name from Jethro to Jethro. The name Jethro is formed by adding the letter Vav to the name Jethro. The letter Vav can be seen as a yud sitting atop a straight line, indicating how a person possessing self-effacement, indicated by the yud, the smallest letter, can bring the most abstract knowledge down into concrete reality and apply it. As noted above, 13, Jethro was originally called Jethro because he was gifted with a keen intellect. He used it to seek out the meaning of life, and he acted on his conclusions. Nonetheless, since human intellect is inherently limited, it can never reach the intense divine awareness that nullifies the ego and enables us to be transparent channels of divinity into the world. For this, we need the Torah. Thus, when Jethro accepted the Torah, the Vav was added to his name, indicating that he was now able to reach beyond his own intellect and bring divine intellect into the world. 14. 12. Aaron and all the elders of Israel came to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law while Moses served them. Rather than focusing on his own meal, Moses ensured that the others were provided for. The lesson here is that regardless of a person's social status, and who can claim a higher social status than Moses, he should consider it more important to take care of someone else's needs than to see to his own. This applies both to physical needs as well as to spiritual advancement. 15. 13. On the following day, there are times when we feel spiritually too connected, when we are imbued with godliness and everything about our spiritual life seems to flow smoothly. At such times we may wonder, maybe I have reached the point where I can relax, maybe I have finally overcome the challenges of my mission in life. For the proper response to this sentiment, we need only look at Moses' example. While on Mount Sinai, Moses reached the peak of spiritual connectedness. He learned the Torah directly from God's mouth and subsisted on spirituality so completely that he did not need to eat or drink for 40 days and nights. Yet, immediately upon rejoining the people, he plunged directly into his new work. On the morrow, after what seemed to be the pinnacle of his career, he found yet higher ways to serve God and attacked them with the very same energy and vitality. The day Moses descended from the mountain after having received the second tablets was the 10th of Tishri, which would be later designated as Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. The lesson here is that even after we reach the supreme holiness of Yom Kippur, there is still another tomorrow, when we should set our sights even higher. 1 year. Immediately after the conclusion of Yom Kippur, Rabbi Yosef Itzhok Schneerson turned to his father, Rabbi Shalom Dovber, the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, and asked, "What now?" After having achieved such sublime levels of spirituality, what is the service required of us on the morrow? Answered the Rebbe, "Now the work of repentance truly begins." 16. 24. God approved Jethro's plan. True, this meant that the people would from now on be under the judicial authority of people beneath Moses' stature. Nonetheless, God approved of this, because this way even the simplest among the people would be able to relate to the Torah's legal system and submit their lives to its authority. If Moses had remained the people's sole judge, some of them would have been overly intimidated by his overpowering presence and spiritual stature, and might therefore have considered themselves unworthy or outside the pale of the Torah's jurisdiction. Yet, in a sense, it is particularly for these simple, unpretentious folk that the Torah was given. It is to the Torah's credit, and a demonstration of its true transcendence, that it contains the laws that govern not only our most sublime moments, but also to the seemingly trivial concerns that crop up in our daily affairs. 17. 26. They will judge the people at all times. Judgments, mishpatim, are the aspects of the divine will that can be logically understood. Had the Torah not instructed us concerning these laws, our own logic would have dictated that we institute them. The Torah's account of the revelation on Mount Sinai is both preceded and followed 18 by mishpatim, logical and self-attainable precepts of the Torah. The giving of the Torah itself, however, was a divine revelation that was so totally above and beyond human grasp that the Jews begged Moses to act as their intermediary and thereby mitigate their experience of this supernatural transcendence. The new insights we constantly glean from the Torah as we continue to study it constitute the ongoing revelation of God at Mount Sinai. Often, the profundity of these insights is so powerful that we sense that they come from some place far beyond us, which indeed they do. Because of this, we can easily fall into the trap of thinking that such divine revelations are spiritual experiences so completely beyond us that it is pointless to try to prepare for them. We erroneously assume that we may as well do nothing, for if it is meant to happen, it will happen anyway. To demonstrate the fallacy of this argument, God prefaced the account of the giving of the Torah with a reference to the judiciary process, mishpatim, reminding man that divine revelation, despite its transcendence, is granted only to those who have prepared for it on their own human level. Furthermore, divine revelation must also be followed by mishpatim. This teaches us that we must not accept God's gifts complacently. If we do, they will remain abstract and transcendent, having no impact at all upon us. Rather, we must immediately integrate and assimilate every spiritual experience so that it becomes a part of us. 19.